Imagine you are standing in the middle of the Libyan desert. The temperature is 45 degrees Celsius. There is no water, no food, and all around you, 1,000 enormous birds are dying. They can't escape. The fences hold them in. Their food ran out weeks ago. Their water troughs are bone dry. The workers who fed them every single day are gone. The man who owned them is gone, and not a single person in the world is coming to save them. Or so they thought. This is the true story of Muammar Gaddafi, the man who ruled Libya for 42 years, who owned palaces filled with gold, who had a personal fortune estimated at $150 billion, and who, when his empire finally collapsed, walked away and left 1,000 living creatures to die in the desert heat. This is what happened next. To understand the ostriches, you first have to understand the man, because Muammar Gaddafi was not born powerful. He was born in a tent. The year is 1942, in the Libyan desert, near a small town called A boy is born to an illiterate Bedouin goat herder. No electricity, no running water, no school nearby. His name is Muammar Gaddafi, and he would grow up to become one of the most feared dictators on the planet. In 1969, just 27 years old, he led a military coup against the Libyan king, a bloodless takeover in the middle of the night. By morning, he was in charge of a country sitting on one of the largest oil reserves in Africa, and he never let go. For 42 years, longer than most of his own citizens had been alive, Gaddafi ruled Libya. Not as a president, not as a prime minister. He gave himself a title so absurd it barely fits in a sentence. Brotherly leader and guide of the great revolution of the great socialist people's Libyan Arab Jamahiriya. In other words, he owned the country, and he spent its money like it was his personal bank account. When rebels finally broke into his family's properties in 2011, what they found inside told the whole story. Gold-plated cutlery, crystal champagne glasses, Rose Savon-worn Versace and Armani suits, Pierre Cardin carpets and Burberry couches, swimming pools at multiple private beach villas, his own conference center built in his hometown. His daughter had a marble mansion with a Cadillac golf cart parked outside. His sons had hot tubs and cases of crystal champagne, while ordinary Libyans had none of it. One rebel fighter stood on a private beach that had been reserved exclusively for Gaddafi's family and said, "Libyans could never swim here. Anyone who dared come close to these walls would be shot dead." But even among all this obscene wealth, there was something that revealed just how far Gaddafi's ego had gone. Something that sat hundreds of miles away in the middle of his desert. Something that the outside world knew nothing about, until the day it was abandoned. West of the city of Sirte, Gaddafi's hometown, and his last stronghold in the sun-blasted desert that most people never ventured into, there existed a place called Wadi Ibai, a private reserve covering hundreds of square miles, belonging entirely to one man. This was not a zoo. This was not a farm in the ordinary sense. This was a statement, the kind of thing only a man who believes he is untouchable builds, because who else fills hundreds of square miles of Libyan desert with 1,000 ostriches? 1,000 ostriches. Plus, herds of rare breed camels, hybrid cattle, multiple breeds of sheep and goats, all of it fenced, all of it staffed, all of it fed, all of it paid for with Libya's oil money, with the money of a nation whose people were not even allowed near his beaches. For years, a dedicated team of workers maintained this vast animal estate. Every morning, they arrived. Every day they filled the water troughs and hauled in the feed. This was Gaddafi's private world, completely hidden from the outside, and as long as he ruled, it stayed perfectly maintained. Until the day the world changed, February 2011. Something is happening across the Arab world. In Tunisia, a president is overthrown. In Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled for 30 years, falls within 18 days. And the shockwave reaches Libya. The people rise up. Gaddafi's response is to call the protesters rats. He sends tanks into the streets. He sends fighter jets against his own cities. He threatens to hunt people. And these are his own words. House by house, room by room, alley by alley. What follows is 8 months of brutal civil war. NATO launches airstrikes. Rebels arm themselves and fight city by city, and Gaddafi, The man who once commanded everything starts to lose. One city falls, then another. In August 2011, rebels entered Tripoli, his capital. His palaces are stormed. His gold is found. His champagne is found. And Gaddafi himself flees. In the chaos of the falling regime, the workers at Wadi by the secret animal farm deep in the desert simply disappeared. Nobody gave them instructions. Nobody told them what to do. Nobody even thought about the animals. The men just left, and the ostriches were locked inside their enclosures with no food, no water, in the Libyan desert, in the middle of summer. Let me tell you what it means to be an ostrich locked in a desert enclosure without water. An ostrich needs water every single day. Without it, dehydration sets in within hours. In extreme heat, the birds weaken fast. Their massive legs, powerful enough to kill a lion with a single kick, give out beneath them. They fall. They thrash wildly in the sand. They lay their beaks in the dust. And that is exactly what Reuters journalists found when they arrived at Wadi Bai in October 2000. They described it in plain, unsparing language. Flopped in the baking sand, a Gaddafi ostrich thrashes wildly, then lays its beak in the dust to die. Not a description from a film. Real journalism. A real bird. A real death. Witnessed by reporters who had come to document the collapse of a 42-year dictatorship and stumbled upon this. At least 100 ostriches had already died by the time anyone arrived. Maybe more. Several lay collapsed in one sweltering pen, either dead and rotting or too weak to stand. The surviving birds paced their enclosures in visible distress. Some were being taken by hungry civilians and fighters who were themselves starving. Because Sirte, the last Gaddafi stronghold, was itself in crisis. Shortages of food, water, and fuel. Humans suffering everywhere. And in the middle of the desert, 1,000 birds that nobody asked for were suffering too. Here is where this story turns. Because the people who came to save these animals were the same people who had been fighting against Gaddafi. His enemies, the ones he had called rats. Fighters from the city of Misrata, who had themselves endured one of the most brutal sieges of the entire civil war, heard about the animals at Wadi, and they drove out into the desert, with bales of hay, with sacks of grain. Not because anyone ordered them to, not because there was any reward waiting, but because they saw living creatures suffering and could not walk away. A veterinarian named Belgasim al-Susi made the drive from Misrata, a city that had just survived months of bombs and sniper fire, specifically to care for Gaddafi's animals. A man with a doctorate in international relations named Mohammed al-Majdoub, who had never worked with ostriches or camels in his life, became one of their primary caretakers. He said something that stayed with the reporters who interviewed him. "We have to protect them. These animals belong to all Libyans now, not to one man." There was another challenge the volunteers hadn't anticipated. Desperate Libyans, people living through a war, running out of food, wanted to take the animals to eat. A volunteer named Al-Sadiq Al-Fidari stood his ground at the farm and said, "We tell the people not to steal them. We tell them, these animals are for all Libyans. You need the authority of all the Libyans to take any." And the people listened, because in that moment, in the ruins of a revolution, a few ordinary men decided that what kind of country Libya became next would be measured even in how it treated 1,000 abandoned birds in the desert. While volunteers were saving his ostriches, where was Gaddafi himself? After his palaces fell and Tripoli was lost, he had fled in secret back to his hometown of Sirte, the same city near his abandoned animal farm. He hid in buildings as rebels closed in around him. For weeks, nobody knew exactly where he was. Some believed he had escaped to the southern desert. Some thought he had already left the country entirely. October 20th, 2011. NATO jets spotted a convoy of 75 vehicles moving at high speed out of Sirte. A US Predator drone fired the first missiles. Then French Air Force jets followed. The convoy was destroyed. Survivors scattered on foot across the desert. Gaddafi ran toward a drainage pipe running beneath a 6-lane highway. He crawled inside. He hid in the filth and darkness. Wounded. Alone. The man who called his own people rats was found hiding in a drain. A 27-year-old rebel fighter named Ahmad al-Sahati stood over the drainage pipe afterward and said, "He called us rats, but look where we found him." Gaddafi was pulled out, wounded and dazed. He was killed shortly after. On October 23, 2011, Libya was officially declared liberated. 42 years of absolute rule ended in a drainage ditch near the same desert where his ostriches were dying. The empire was over, but the birds were still there, and the men who despised everything Gaddafi stood for were still feeding them. The ostriches survived because strangers fed them, because the enemies of their owner chose mercy instead of indifference, because ordinary people who had themselves just survived a war decided that the animals had done nothing wrong, and they were right. The birds hadn't chosen their owner. They hadn't chosen to be a dictator's status symbol. They had simply been born into captivity, and in a free Libya, they belonged to everyone, or to no one. Which is really the same thing. Rebel commander Abu Bakr Essa said something at Wadi by that cut straight to the heart of it. Gaddafi didn't care for people. He killed them with tanks. How can you expect him to care about his animals? It is a sentence that contains an entire education. Because power that does not respect life, any life, is not really power at all. It is just cruelty wearing a uniform. Libya after Gaddafi has had a long and painful road. The country fell into further conflict in the years that followed. There is no clean, simple ending for a nation that spent 42 years having its wealth taken by one family. But in the desert west of Sirte, in those weeks of October 2011, something remarkable happened quietly, without cameras, without recognition. Men who had just survived a revolution stopped what they were doing, loaded hay onto trucks, drove into the desert, and chose to show up for 1,000 creatures that had no voice, no vote, and no way to thank them. Because even in the middle of war, that is what humans sometimes do. They choose to show up for the helpless. A dictator built an empire on oil and fear. He filled his palaces with gold and his desert with animals. When it all fell apart, the gold was looted, the palaces were stripped, and his enemies celebrated in his swimming pools. But those same enemies drove into the desert to feed his abandoned ostriches. And I think that says more about the Libyan people than anything else that happened in 2011. If this story surprised you, if you had never heard that Gaddafi had a secret desert farm, or that his own enemies were the ones who saved the animals he left behind, share this video, because these are the stories history books skip over, but they are exactly the ones worth remembering.